tene dang arang so tene da khare sen wa ta de da so chu ro ba se da chu song yang da chu song na chu lam ten ro ba she go re es da chu lam ten ro ba de chu lam ten men ro le khare se na da ze nga zo xian de la ma ta yin ba ha ko现在那么他一把好可能落到了，最起码在别讲的是他把曾经前被恐怕出要，什么马上我去呢，没考在他他们来说，对我错，我那这个路上，我这路上的同样呢，就让他们说话的现的，提起年不是开始过的是呢，可能年没讲过的是，可能他东亚上英语把西把去过的是，可能。
And so then, so let me continue. So we have spoken about why our mind doesn't turn toward the Dharma. I have said that in order for the mind to turn toward the Dharma, we have to think about the impermanence of this life, and then give up the concerns for this life. And so then next, even though the Dharma becomes the Dharma, the Dharma must also become the path. And so if one renounces this life, and if one is content with just the happiness of samsara, such as being born as a god or a human in the next life, then one's Dharma has not become the path. And as an antidote to that, one should understand that all of samsara has the nature of suffering.
tene ta lo pong pa pa sen go bo lo so sa ro ta tang ma tang ne song bo ro ba yu nga kro de da ji kha ji ta ma ta ma tian xin ke pa su xin de la ye tian jan de ne dong a rang ji qian bo yin zong su re si da da lam ta tang ma nian song bi ra ta nian song tene ro ba yu nga sa na ta te re ro ba je sa yu nga wa ne mo tu nga de je kyo sa ro ba 我这其实呢，就我现在做这玩意有人做玩意，这他们也是经常追求什么，这玩意抽了不让做，他们也是要年头都是拉空的，马子都通州空，你知道吗？都是啥的，而且我听的，这玩意是是那追求啥的，或者他打没事，打讲是的。これはコロンコでないです。だベーチャ電力中には電力中にだしな。電力中にのそうマレーバルであってこれはチャングロマレーで人ドジラそうバルマンロねでジェワガワナワチワヨラチワラそうてちねよ。マレードジ先日做这コロン就是吧。那这其实可能在大讲是科技它也没他们的，我开始的那做成的那一类是，我真的开始的那一类是，没他们现在电把看呀，我们是特别出现的那一种是，我的这那个基本我那的，一天去多少电波只有嘛的是，我的基本上顺的了一天手机是，我的那东阿让一千波的，我的这趟是能可玩车的，但可玩他东阿让一类是，送出是吧？
And then next, there's a quote by Nagarjuna. And it says, if the gods and humans and the three lower realms, this wheel of 5 types of beings are impermanent. So the 3 lower realms, so there are gods, humans, and 3 lower realms. This is what we call a wheel of 5 types of beings. So mostly we speak about 6 realms, and when we speak about 5 realms, then these 5 are related to 5 main afflictions, and then the gods and the demigods are in one category, being really in the same place, just the gods being above and the demigods being below. And so this cycle of existence is like a wheel. For example, we often speak about the 12 links of interdependence. And so that is like a wheel, like a forward progression, creating samsara, starting with ignorance, and then that leads to karmic formation, and that leads to birth, aging, sickness, death, and so on. And so then it keeps going in circles, and we start with ignorance again, and so on. So this cycle of existence is impermanent, and it says it is unstable, like a dancing god. Like it is like a play. It is not like a real stable thing. So what wise person can put their trust in this? So temporarily we may experience some happiness, but ultimately it never lasts. So how can we rely on it? How can we trust in it? This is the great nature of suffering. So samsara is by nature suffering.
真的咋？这种多，真的老朋一年这种的，可完了，对吧？没那的洗完，没长完了，之前没种的，种多才这么老样子。
And then Vasubandhu had said there is no happiness for samsaric beings. There is no cold in fire. There is no fragrance in filth.
但是这话来抽有的，是这话来抽的，这话来抽的，你说头里说的来抽那个吧，我来抽，其实呢，接完呢，那些有的，接那些有的，接完那些我才可是呢，俺来接呀，资源来接呀，出现来接呀，还得俺去资源去出现来公安接呀的话，我去接完些。这làm ju ngà thế làm ju ya thế tôi ju ta thọ ngà tiền này thế so ju một cái rồi làm ju ngà mình đâu xin thế còn là chẳng cái đấy thế nên đồng ăn ba xe đi mà đấy sẽ đó đồng ăn cái nào gì đấy và thế nên nhớ là cái đấy sẽ 차랑 cái đồng ăn 예다 진공 cái đồng ăn 전로 르모 cái đồng ăn mình trên phong cái đồng ăn chỉ là sao bộ ju mấy bạn thế thế rồi bọn tôi đồng ăn với sao thế ta mà gì tập sự cái đồng ăn ta chỉ phụ đồng gì đồng ăn 真这话这种说说的东阿巴的米切送多，但这种这话是不是就说说东阿巴的米不有的是，最起码那这个这种可谓东阿咱们应用车祸当，那咱们在当应用当心都是这种可谓东阿，咱们在当红呢。
And then it says there are six types of beings. So these six types of beings are the three lower realms and the three higher realms. And then it says there are four states of birth. So the four states of birth are being born from a womb, being born from an egg, being born through heat and moisture, and then miraculous or instantaneous birth. And there are five paths for samsaric beings. So that is those five states of existence that we just mentioned arising from the five poisons. And there's only suffering for those beings who unwillingly wander in samsara. So we have no choice but to wander in samsara. Without any choice, we must wander in samsara. And there is only suffering. For example, in the hell realm, there is the suffering of heat and cold. In the hungry ghost realm, there is the suffering of hunger and thirst. In the animal realm, there is the suffering of stupidity, ignorance, and exploitation. In the human realm, there is the suffering of toil and poverty. As we know, we have so many activities and things to do as human beings. In the demigod realm, there is the suffering of combat and dispute. In the god realm, there is the suffering of death, transmigration, and downfall to lower births. And there's inconceivable suffering. There's inconceivable suffering within the six realms. Milarepa had said that when I think of the suffering experienced in the six realms, I feel an intense, like kind of my heart. I feel pain in my heart. I feel moved in my heart.
근데 다做的个他在开始中学是那做的这现在嘛他对话他的这种状态有的他计划起码在拉说没拉说在土里计划拉的这个都要不拉送这个上呢我的第一个计划才这样呢计划的到他这个嘛的应该送这是个可说他们做的我这样对第一个他这个罗巴的路那可他接呢다 제면 양 삼삼 토리진 삼삼 연송제 때 제네세 tempo yo mares tendu o tenen tan korwat maranji ni bat o ten shores
And so mainly what we should consider here is that so after we have reflected on the impermanence of this life, we may think that if I'm born as a god or a human in my next life, then I will be happy. That is fine. That's all I want. But even if you are born as a god or a human, that won't last either. Once the merit comes to an end, again, you may take birth in the lower realms. And this is how we go around in circles, sometimes taking birth in the higher realms, sometimes in the lower realms. None of those states of existence has any stability. We keep going around in circles, and that's the suffering circle of samsara.
o tenen tele jang nyarba la ta nyarba sabe nyarba se ze chame nyarba se sadang nyarba sanyarji changyarji yores de nianse niankor ni zidu ta nyarkam jubji o tse ge wa ngema de guzang la me xiong na je yore me ze nyarkam jubji kare ze chires 찬야지 장야지 스티건 다 예전에 거티니 뭐 하고 서 말하고 그러다 아까마 바샤 만나니 제브디스 냐냐감 집지 이트레스 라브 저세 요리 구상나 샤만
Gamapashana.
샤마 샤나니
Hunie,
음
Hunia, what?
다 코니냐로 말에 코랑 하고 와서 말아
Finish karma pani karare, samgato.
다 냐감 집지 세 카레 세계 자체레스 냐감 집지 카레 제 지디 냐감 집지 데 찬야지 장야지 지금 니 하고 말아 예전에 이거 니 하고 말이 디가라 까마 바샤 만나니 게라데 있어서라 thế thì con mà bà xem nọ như số chụp chụp gì đấy rồi làm đấy con nó ham mà vào như thế cô làm chỉ cả nhiều sao mà vào thế con mà bà xem nọ như bà 잡 cho sao mà họ có nói
The kama pani din shy, right?
có rồi nhân không chụp gì cả đấy thì ta nhà gì thằng nhà gì thì nó chưa rồi thì ta nhớ xem những con như bố thế con sẽ cho sao mà vào
Yeah.
con mà bà xem nọ như chụp thì ta chụp gì đấy thì con đó họ có nói
Shama parang kareka, ane shama parang kama pani ra.
xem nọ như sẽ xem một cái rồi thế mà rồi thế nó khó nhiều rồi đó
So then, moreover, there are 18 hell realms, 18 realms of the hell beings, such as there's 8 hot hells and 8 cold hells. Then there is the lesser hell and the neighboring hell. There was actually once a story in the Words of My Perfect Teacher where someone asked, what are those 18 hells? And so then so that the person knew that there's 8 hot hells and there's 8 cold hells, but I couldn't think of the other 2 hells. Didn't know about the other 2 hells. And so at that time, there were 2 karmapas, one with the red head and one with the black head, that they were quite famous. And so then he just said, and the other one is the red head, and the other one is the black head. But of course, it's that was not true, but that's what he said.
다 지난 코로나 하마고 디 랍지 많이 디 까마 바 샤마나 게라 친구 데 코스 샘 트렌드 제 라셔서
The reason why he said that is just because he needed to say something, because he didn't know, and all he could think of is, oh, these 2 karma bars are quite famous, so just say that.
근데 다 동ар 서와 차라 유랭와 나지 메소스 다 동ar 서와 차 유랭보다 냐바도 유랭보 그래서 나 메소스나 소마 토브리키 동ar 유레스다 다 소마 토브리 동ar 那位图上看的差出么久呢？七万里把上几没下，我的那位东阿是说在图上呢看的差出么久呢？这些理解好像里边是因为他上节就面的去那位东阿在中红的的强调什么？这说毛伯这的这人节前呢，这看写差就呢，中的就在那说到那位东阿是说偏人节前呢。
And then it says the experience of suffering is everywhere and constant and intolerable. So it is constant as in it lasts an eternity for a long time, and it is unbearable. And just to hear about it is unbearable. And just hearing about them can make you vomit blood and die. As a story of when the Buddha taught the suffering of the hell beings to a group of bodhisattvas. And there were some bodhisattvas who developed so much compassion when they heard these words that they vomited blood. So there are many such examples.
전에 당가랑 또 그래 자다 들어와. 전에 높은 파프에 계스자 내 신청 나와서 그제. 신청 나한테 니제 동통 숨자에 차도 답지. 동안하면서 완전히 열외 동안 충분히 차리 한번 보고 머리 한번 보고 스타트 디스칼리 커버로 왕아라서. 니마제 맞제 그냥 너무 숨자서 잡나? 다 동안만 보는 거라. 대 열외 동안 충충제 사 요 말에 스티 동안 정도.
And then next Nagarjuna said, and it's probably from the letter to a friend, in this world, the unbearable suffering of having been stabbed for a single day by 300 spears does not approach even a portion of the slightest suffering of the hells. So if you think about being pierced by 300 spears simultaneously, how much pain would that be? And the suffering that we would experience then is not even a fraction of the suffering that we would experience in hell.
我真的切从我认同，他切认同，你话切认同往起呢。当然，老朋友应说我是我办那事，马来北京我办那事，我办做。我真的开始第一讲看的老家的第一穷的社交的，去我见的切切意思，他常年来的，现在你学你做了是我的，才认多。别想着第一节录下来，我去康巴的在用呢。听到第一节你妈的人嘛，有劲呢，这但是可丢心呢。我真的去我这测试意思，但你话先把这特了你学噻，常年先把这特了你学切个的是。
And then regarding the lifespan of the hells, the Acharya Vasubandhu said in the Abhidharma that taking one sesame seed every 100 years from its container until it is empty is the lifespan of the blistering hell. The lifespan of others are 20 times as much. So if you imagine kind of a whole like room filled with sesame seeds, and you take a single seed every 100 years. By the time it's empty, you've completed the lifespan of a being in the blistering hell, which is the shortest lifespan in the hell realm. And then each other hell realm is 20 times, each lifespan in the other hell realms is 20 times longer progressively.
真的，他说他的这里是众多的在这看都是呢，很多三年是其中多3年的，我先把长尾年的吃起，汤是7尾年的吃起的，杨树汤的人说抽人品多大吃汤的养娘子，他rabd年的rabd 撒当难米花花就karwa这一弄众多，我他杨树这种年的他参加那些同学的杨树的。杨树的他可能 야전에 긴 안도라서 직세다 냠쇼사라와 직세들 물론 앞자지래 디냐바티 그제 샤마제 인사고 제리 어떤류다 샤솜실로 제지 롱 앞자서스 또 토쇼사라와
Mm. And then it speaks, so that was the cold hells, and then it speaks about the hot hells and the 6 hells, in the hot hells, the reviving hell and so forth. A single day is equal to the lifespan of the desire gods. And so the reviving hell is the shortest lifespan of the hot hells. And it's similar to the neighboring hell, and what was the other one called? The neighboring and the lesser hell. And it is said that one day in that hell is about 500 human years. And so then a single day is equal to the entire lifespan of a desired God. So it's an extremely long time, and that's just the reviving hell.
다들 인조는 세랭도 로네는 다냐와 나미도 허케지 투그리 슬라도 와테네 인조 다 세랭도 효리데 다 세랭고 효제리 다 알람 타리아 옹사 말잖네 젠도 와세레
And then as the hells progress, the lifespan gets longer, and the longest lifespan of the hot hells is in the extremely hot hell, where it is half an intermediate aeon, and then in Avicii is an intermediate aeon. That's the longest one. So at this point, once you're in such a hell, it seems like there's no way you will ever get out of it. It seems so long.
되네 다시 좀 되네 다 예다라다 치즈바진스 단도와리도 니파티 예다리 예 송송 담보 니파티 예다라다 예다라다 이다 선데다 제 자동차도 공부요 될 이다 시다 예다스 어디 치즈바진스 나크즈바진스 진투즈바진스 될라서 더 지신 공부 동화요레스 동화 차보다 유림보트로 요레스 되네 단 로ponti 그래 로폰 파페스다 대연사리 로폰 파페트 송어서로 신팅나사리 칸에 카제 카메 examlas 또와르예 도장 찜바시스 메상 채널 중지 내가 세양 투상 누바만이스다 칸에 카 메 exams요레스 카시 또와제 릭 레침보나 저거 배침보요레스 특别카 저거도 그러와 예 메파테리 만들어서 그러마 어제네 메상 채널 버바 중지 exam스 다제 사마 야보다 라크서 메상다 텐데 세용도 디시잖아 텐스 히라 니야 네파요 스타데 가게 뭐와마나 야보 치제 치나 토피오사르면 제 가레나세 사마세 토비아 깔레 카보요사르와 텐두제 송도와
And then next is the hungry ghosts. There are 3 types of hungry ghosts, and so this term it's like it means preta or yidag in Tibetan. So it's a kind of like a mental body that experiences a starving existence. And there are 3 kinds. There are those with outer obstruction, with inner obstruction, and with shared obstruction. And they're all tormented by hunger and thirst, and the suffering is long and beyond limit. Then Nagarjuna said, some have needle-eve mouths and bellies the size of a mountain. They suffer from hunger. So some have a very large belly and a very narrow throat. So when they put something in their mouth, or they cannot go through their throat, so they cannot really eat anything. They have no ability to eat even the smallest quantity of thrown out filth. So sometimes if we dedicate something to them, they might receive some, but normally they have no ability to eat.
되네 다 예다서 세진다 지나다 别讲的是门说给大瓦节了也大小马节气，你家节气真的在咱大瓦中意罗自己说的罗俺节子，他头个的是大可能自己这个咯，
Nimi Davachi konso Nimachira.
你嘛在小马节气，这自己从对真的也大可能罗这他这往俺做没小马节了也大给马的个老送的。
Mi
mümkün davacıyla,
Davachi.
mümkün davacıyla ya da şahmacıyı. O te şahma sumçıla lo davacıyı dava te jungila lo jesi sonraki ya da kuran lo sen abya tuberes. Dina karzon do sen sesi jan nga tong ta jan chichi ma jo ta mu lo zin te lo chesa ten lo shime shurkyo sa marwa. Chime jors. Dikri nga tong sa te tokyo sa. Dongar jo jima na wa yo ba mo bos mo ko je bos. Ah,
Picking up down.
인사로.
And then, so for the lifespan of a hungry spirit, so generally it is said that one day for a hungry 1 month, okay, sorry, 1 month for a human, 1 human month equals 1 hungry ghost day. And then they live 500 years of a hungry ghost years. So here it says they will not die actually it says 15,000 years. So in any case, they live for a much longer time than we do.
전에 다 동아주 만한고 모바일 손도와 라사로와
Dilamari.
안에
So their suffering is inexpressible. But here, this one here is just a hint of them. Just a hint of them is given here.
전에 다 돈로래 다 손파던 게 손좀 돈로래 돈로 동아 준종만에 르제 몽베 르제 몽보 다 름보다 제라 다 돈로티 강야 셰그 말스 름보스 몽바다 그랬다这当的鸟话的一大撮是讲不有的，是是你们去来了，是哈口个的是，他通常是清哈口嘛的，是的，这弄流行蒙巴斯，我在流行蒙巴斯，真的前一年那把讲错，那抢去把嘛，咱是我的前一年为他讲错那抢你晓得这把嘛做这个了，他那一边没事忙不有的是，前一年那把。年下年啥吧，他是我的年下年这啥的起，那讲做那多啊，听讲做把人通常都听着，我就是这啥的起别东安多去穷啥穷去啥，把后康都啥样的这里，看透了吧？那切穷去啥吧说就去，他看透了吧？他说看透的，他说在通州，当时没运的时候通州个有了，他说看透了吧？那个的，我他这说别当时一节讲他说跟身边先把啥都给。我当时就去下北东啊，我来出题，现在这开始出啊，去北讲着，下班中，他说你们穷他说我来，他说出给的呢，工作地都他就去个是，我在过去现在他开始现在没，他经常他就去让没，经常我做地是多个里看不多的，你们我做服务员那他牙齿都讲到这个忙不在起的，他大个马错那他说地都个啦，他讲给，再往起跑地都个话我的都给他就去个是。我加上差不多是打这个，打这个脚步就个是加上加，咱们这去个哇，我听说有的，他听说我做这档你阿美利卡那所在大件呢，听说就是别刚眼多少题，听说就是别想着环球就是把大小啥子的呢，他可能这可是他说狼的啥子面，其老说起来大学嘛是吧？狼啥子面头要嘛的题，我们学校那就是在第一题呢，什么面下可能通对可能什么东西结果，什么把个被基本没把加过样的。我听说多，听说他今天狼啥节狼地当对，听说他看这个原因过去了，实际上通常都是在路过这真的，不可能跑下去那马赔钱。我听说他东啊把他没把他有的是。
And then next come to the animals. The animals also experience continual suffering. Most animals live in stupidity and in ignorance. So animals are mostly afflicted by the suffering of a lack of intelligence. For example, the hell beings and the hungry ghosts, it is said that they actually possess intelligence. They have more intelligence. But animals don't have that kind of intelligence. So they are in great oceans, and some creatures are as small as sediment in a beer container, and they eat their own flesh and so forth. Some animals live on dry land, where the large ones eat the small ones. So when we think about the suffering of the animals, in the oceans, for example, where animals eat each other, the anxiety that they constantly experience. And that then there's animals that have to face the suffering of being hunted, being used as beasts of burden. So, for example, there's those animals like on the surface, not in the oceans, on the surface, like deer, for example, that are being hunted and they're living in constant fear and anxiety and run away, and we run after them to chase them. And then there's animals that are used to carry heavy burdens, heavy loads. That has happened a lot in Tibet in the past. In Tibetan people would used to like load their yaks and their cattle with all kinds of baggage to transport baggage. And often it seemed that you cannot fit one more thing on it, and they would still try to put more on it and then force the animal to go. Or they would ride on horseback and then whip the horse with iron whips to make it go faster. And also in America, we can see there's a lot of suffering. For example, when you think about those factory cows that their entire life they spent locked up in a small cage, and they basically their whole life can't really move. They can't really get up. They're just being used for milking and then the flesh. And when you see that, how they live trapped in this cage without even able to move their limbs, it's really quite sad to see that they're suffering. So that's the suffering of the animals. They're carry impossible loads, and they're beaten with a whip and so on.
전에 다 로폰 파괴시네 스타 시대 나서로 전도 진에 나야 소바 당 진화 대소 동아도 나 소죠 시조를 개바 방바 남는 제라 지자 신트 메시 신스 카지 메테 회장 로바상 샤당 바페 치튼 치바요 어미 현재 라페 도파동 자수 다데 자수 자당 자수 다네 코르스 담네 다데 코르스 와타서린도 통로진에 살살살살 요리스 통로진에라 다 조거리 다 메타고 제거리 메타고 샤사 세이통다 몸보 제거와 쟁와다 덱초스 다 타페 담다동 데네 동알 몸보 노레스 시조르 개와 방반다 시조르사 시와초라 개와라테 방데레테 통로ትን 제거리 개와치 지마도 제일라 직자 신트메지 소다 제지가 다리 공수반을 세세메지 카제 메테 회장 로바스 다 카제 메테 장 자신 보레죠 텐주 요로와 카제 안부터서 자신 보 니마 호부터서 조세 통로진 도와 티부터서 안가시면 쇼르나 제 통로 지 효소도와 공소 제 조조 제와 다 조세这里这个卡些로바스 좀 매한도르다 랑보체도 로바스 화서 나자인 고백로서 화서 나자인 자신 보는 자 진도와 와체 카제 로바스 좀 매한도르 와타 자신 보지 그래다 카제 샤키 샤사야치 카제 바화트 바화트 좀 자신 보는 도와 배차 공연만이나 다제 고고도 지 바화요 화 바화트 좀나 화고 공야 바지안다 전고 공야 지 바화트 요르다 심견 ngema다 호다 야 토사도 되냐도 다 로크 바관도 공야 고거로 와선도 치도 치와초로스 와다 생산이나 여러 와다 제고 감소다 이거 그다음에 여러 와다 이 바꿔 봐 어찌 아미 현대 높은 데 라페 데 바탕 뭐 라마춘의 요마 아도로도 라마춘의 마 현대 세왕 젠바레 현바 아 라페 데게레스 동게레스 자상 작수다네 거다 작수도 망보체도 작수다 로함 카마냐나 카레르단 치 레카 고르게레스
Die Shiva die Kare lassen tambon Shiva.
시조르 개와 방마세네 다 시바 초르데 시바 투비아테 개와레스 세세 방데레데 다 텐주 동안에 오그레스 효사로
Then there's another quote by Nagarjuna. So it says that there are many sufferings in the animal realm, such as being killed, bound, beaten, and cut. So, for example, animals are being bound by ropes and beaten into slavery and cut for their body parts. And for those who have eliminated, it says peace-bringing virtuous actions will experience the unbearable suffering of eating each other. So there are some who have abandoned virtuous actions, which is like peace-bringing actions. And as a result of that, so there's those beings, which are the animals that have not committed virtue, and as a result, they experience the suffering of, for example, eating each other. And then they die. Some die for pearls, some die for wool, bones, flesh, and hide. So, for example, we kill animals. Sometimes we want to have their wool, and we want to take their have their bones. Or for example, like in the Tibetan tradition, in Tibet, we have this animal, the zo. A zo is like a cross of a yak and a cow, and so yak bull and a cow actually. So that zo has like a kind of a special a kind of flesh. And then an elephant, for example, has tusk, like bones, and Tibetans also consider elephant tusk as very, very kind of valuable. And sometimes also bones are used for making medicines, and we eat their flesh. We use their skins. Often skin is used for our clothing in Tibet, for example. We live in a higher altitude, and so we would, in the old days especially, would wear sheep skins or cow skins as clothing. But also nowadays, people are wearing leather clothes or leather shoes, and that's also basically skin. And so then some are helpless and are beaten by the hands of others. So they have no choice of where to go. They are pulled back and forth by the hands of others. They're exploited and beaten with iron whips and hooks. So if they are led in one direction, but they won't behave, they won't listen, then they are beaten and forced into that direction. So.
근데 다시 좀 다시 중에 송송 동아리 다 드린 토리 좀 드리. 다 토리 좀다 잠보도 말이었어. 몰라 양 두지 그 동아라서 다 차반 두지 그 동아라 그러. 두지 그 동아라서 동아라 그 동아라서 저베 동아라서 잠도. 어디 간다 가르고선 제베 동아, 개베 동아, 나베 동아, 치베 동아 시요. 스티간의 동아시. 어디 간다는 자 당와다 집에 토바. 그냥 참바당 제제 토바. 토바. 요발은 소총마토 이바 제바미니 어다 동아선들 지요레 시장지다 중이사서와.
And these were the sufferings of the three lower realms, and next is the suffering of the three higher realms, starting with the suffering of the human beings. As says, there are 11 kinds of suffering for human beings. So there's the all-pervasive suffering, and which is the conditioned suffering. There is the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change, and then these are the three main ones. And then on top of that, there are four more kinds of suffering: the suffering of birth, of aging, sickness, and death. So now you have 7 kinds of suffering, and then on top of that, there is 4 more sufferings. Then humans also experience the fear of meeting with enemies, the fear of separation from loved relatives, loved ones, failing to protect what you have, and not finding what you do not have. So these are the 11 kinds of sufferings of human beings.
다들 정보대 처반 두지 동아서 세세리다. 누지 동아르세 때 제당아도 시라 썰고 말했어. 대 동아르세 참말 차비요래. 신장 참말 차도래서. 어때 시라 썰고 말했어. 배창라시 배샤오래. 랑티라 분양마제요나. 라펜티노나 마데 요 말스. 메이나제 손나 데 마데발에 홍그레스. 어때네 아테나이레스 제안탕치는데 데 동아르 송오스 쇼는 그레스. 제가 시라 썰고 말했어. 다 동아르 동아르센데 다 소소 동아르제 배창라시나 가라서 수고 참마 대오미 나산다스 자동나 티강 당시 신바제 나야 안다 동아리미야 양나타 란제 강에 침보제 원 티강 강에 신바제 팀이야 어떤 다 동아르세 어떤 저르베 동아르세 그래서 저르베 동아르세 그래 다 배차다 세토지 보면은 세미 동아리나 근데 여러 번 알아서 아니 가시테 나로 지고 지로원 내수다 동아리도 와 와다선 저르베 동아라스 나 제와는 제와와 개바는 개바세도 gen고 차글에 들어와 제 지수만 하래 가르송을세나 대체 뭐라 지수만 하래 또퍼 다음에 다운로드 상스 또퍼 다음에 다운로드 상스 다 게드 또퍼 다음에 다운로드잖아 프로와야 살이야 부구나 부두제 막 고치 야 부구라 테나기메 야라투 말이스 또퍼 다음에 다운로드 챌린저 벤 잡로드 상스 챌린저 다 gen고도 타타스 데노 나도니 아메리카는 너 홀 남시 참모지 gen고서 그거 맨로트 말데 챌린저데 북서서 지바도 북 차제 지잠트는 고치 칼레 잡그레스 나기다 챌린저 벤 잡로드 상스 kare topor tangme danglo cha dang zho ben jam sado chi be dolo tas sado chi be dolo sen sa long sa nam da ko ma chi so na sa ro ga ten yi ma de du kale do to ma sa so te de du te ma do to ma res wa ta ten ru gang ye wa ta ga wa res ge ba ten na wa chi chung do po da ma la re be na wa chi chung do po chi bi chung chung ze le do po na 다 시민아 매매 누가 그럼 좀 누시바 마시에선스 다 또다 누가 참 마시선데 하고 있으면 왜 스타면라래 되지 치와 치와래다 치와 넘지 만매다스 다 넘시선 만매데 저 소도야 말아 어떤 아기래 손도 말아래 되는데 왔다 동아시치
Squati nare pochi corti. Nare pochi corti.
고 들라 손 상보
Ci penso,
도퍼 다음에 다운로드 도퍼스나 프로바제 살 다표나 대야 푸두 부나트네 야 고구치도 야 개그와
tu porsi na kare.
프로바스는 살 생제 다표나 배다 daksa 도퍼스는 다 daksa 면 도퍼라베 야 살야 부군 고구치 안 태양거와 텐텐두테 야 텐나기 난도 면 나토 말스 차샤 야 나토 말스 겐고 차는 저번 제로 하고 고구 군도되면 야 타타소부 짜차라야 말스 그 사도 집에 들어오서는 다 갈래마 도통 말해서 그사 로샬레 풍마제고는 타바치 남 다종 타바치 좀 마사 사로 그러 tenna yi dode shokshin buma dode ima do thum mares
Yeah. So then next, so another goes over the suffering. So there's the all pervading suffering. And so the all pervasive or all pervading suffering is a suffering that we are generally not aware of. We don't recognize it. But it's all pervasive. So all beings possess this kind of suffering. Everyone has it. For example, normally it is just like having a piece of hair in the palm of your hands. But as long as it's in your hand, you don't notice it. But if the same piece of hair goes into your eye, you will feel very uncomfortable. So what it means is that like the moment a condition arises, the suffering will manifest itself because it has been there at all times. It's just we don't usually notice it. So then that's all pervasive suffering. Then there is the suffering of suffering. So, or in other words, it's the suffering upon suffering. And that is, we don't just have one suffering and then the other one. For example, you're sick, and on top of that, you have something else going on, another problem. So you have one problem, and then on top of that, you have other problems too. So it's like suffering upon suffering. And then there is the suffering of change, and that is, for example, you may experience a lot of happiness and easy life in your early days, but then as you get older, often we experience a lot of misery, or it just happens in a single day. You may be very happy in the morning and then suffer a lot in the evening in just one single day. And then, so that's the suffering of change. So these are the three like major kinds of suffering. And then there's the suffering of aging, of getting older. And so Milarepa actually sang a song about the suffering that we experience as we age. And so he said that when you get when you're old, you're trying, so the way you rise, the way you get up from your like seating position when you're old is like a horse that's being chained to a pole. So when an animal is chained, not so easy to get up. So just like that, they're kind of trying to get themselves up, but it's really hard. And then he said that when you're walking around kind of bent like a child trying to catch a bird, kind of chasing a bird really slowly and carefully stalking on the bird. So a child kind of walks like a bent that way. So that's how an old person walks. And also in Tibet, it's a bit different than in America because it's much colder. So then like the older people would be much more bent maybe. And then he said, then when you sit down, you're sitting down like a bag that's
hol cha yo marwa kha te ma
uh,
hol nga zu gop cha ma do kha te
yeah.
ni de
So also as a background information, there's no chairs in Tibet. So when they sit down, they have to sit down on the ground. So when they sit down, they're sitting down like they are a bag filled with rocks, and a bag that's hung up somewhere, and then you snip the rope, it just comes crashing down. So this is how you sit down when you get older. And so then in the end, Milarepa said, so death is just around the corner. Whenever the oil of your butler lamp is used up, then you're going to die.
tene da je dang hu nge ma da me la re pe tu zu gop cha yo sa ma re nga zu chung chung gang gop cha hu ya ma do ta sing song da gop cha yo je ro wa wa
So just to clarify, we are at the time of Milarepa. So in Milarepa's times, there were no chairs in Tibet. We do have chairs in Tibet now.
da te ji de ne da dang wa ra dang wa dang chi be to ba se wa da ro tu zong chi hong ji zang be sab za chi go pyo nga rang ze se ji de top ji de zang ti sab za chi go ya so so me ga tu zo ze no se dang hong ge zang ti sab za chi go pyo re is nia chang ba dang chi be to ba nia chang ba da so so men ja re ha ma re so so ma da chen ro ji zang ni da dong ga to ba yo re is yo ban so xiong ma da jo le je yong na ju ti so xiong tu ma re is be ga le yo re da ze chu gon da yin na ze 레카 레냐도 야고 레카 메지와지 레카 야고 마지비된 소총적이 메서 소소 빼갈래요 미바 제지미니 자 미바이나 제사야 통야레 소소지 주노고 마라 와세제데 미니 제 동아지 와튼주 요레 스타제다 지스멜라레베 추고 남네 여도이 우포 남네 메도이 요미 탐치 동아시 주스타 요나 미나 삼마 동아지 주레스 그 탐중지나 지탕지 세워다 탐중지나 다 지보단 지홍그래 정도만 하래.
And then there's the suffering of that fear of meeting with enemies, or just the fear of someone harming you. For example, you think that I have to be very careful about what I do, because otherwise they're going to kill me or hurt me or do something to me. So there's always this fear that somebody's going to do something bad to us. Then there is the fear of separating from loved ones. And then there's the fear of protecting what you have. So wealthy people, even though they have a lot of wealth, they still have a lot of problems, because maybe they have employees, people working for them who don't do a good job. That creates hardship. So there's always problems that come with that. And then on the other hand, there's the suffering of not finding what you do not have. And on the other hand, one may not find anything to eat or to drink, or any wealth at all, and that's suffering. Milarepa said that the rich suffer from their riches, and the poor suffer from their poverty. Everyone suffers, whether they are rich or poor. Therefore, he said, son, if you practice the Dharma, that is where you find happiness.
대치테네 당하랑 소티 인도체 텔란도다 도르나스 난 도르나 네발렘베 풍고데 동아라지 풍고가데 동아크라지 이데스 난 도르 듀초이나 네발렘 풍고가 본데 동아크라지 동아 네발렘 바라와 네발렘센 동아서 네발렘 와테 동아크라지 로폰 잉냐케스 드레킹 폰지 레지톱스다 로폰 잉냐스 드레킹 폰지 레다 제바 사고 쇼요랑 안 소딩나 뭐 제바 사고 대대서 추네요 막 레카 빼먹고 레카 제 레폰도 깔레 선세요 다 인원이 깔레서 야 네네네 되네 호노나사 충메세스 다 호노요레 호노토서 다 키쇼도 참타 호노토도 키쇼 마티 샤즈면서 쇼레 충메세스한다 나상라제 용나다 산다서도 뇨라제 이 나제를 지보요 마 실로 레카 깔레 자 나나 다 지보요 마레 드라타 치 현 콜라차 서다 드라타 좀 치 이제 자 도파 치고레스 대랑 보고다 좀 차도레스 메이동아 내려와시 서다 메이동아 내려와나지레스.
And it says then, in brief, the 5 afflicted aggregates are the nature of suffering. And then Vasubandhu had said, worn out by toil, poverty, and work. So we know that nowadays, especially, we are so busy all the time. We never get a break. We never have a relaxed and easy time. We're constantly working hard all day long. So then we are persecuted by death, sickness, and a spouse. So people may follow us to get their money back, or we get sick, or our spouse keeps complaining and nagging when we are home. So wherever we go, when we go outside, there is so much stress, we have so much work to do. When we come home, our spouse complains and nags. So we find no peace wherever we go. Fear of meeting with an enemy attached to our children. The sufferings of human beings are like hell.
다시 전에 단 소리 저다만 동아 죽색 요리슬라고 어다 동아 죽색 지금 송아다리 동아를 송 다리 죽색 그때야 다 잠깐이나 어때 말 동아 죽색 요리스.
So thus the human beings have 11 sufferings.
전에 다 뒤질라 하마예서 리도아 하마예서 단 초크나 하마예서 롱초라 창도 샘동 단 하마예서 롱초 창도 치코스 창도 치사 되게 하레스 하라 창도 치코스 다 변조서 소리 통통도 효사라 들려야 창도 치 전에 창도 샘다 동네 독샘케 동아르스 독샘케 다 동아르 빼면서 요레스 탑소 다도 동아르 가디위나 단 타트 코넨 쟁고레 근저기들이 다도 제 제네토 소남디 시드윈 하마이 마고 제쇼서와 어텐디 되게 그 동아르들 바드미 바요레스.
And then next is the suffering of the demigods, or the jealous gods of the 6 realms. And they are tormented they're mentally tortured by envy or jealousy. They're jealous of the wealth of gods. So the demigods see the wealth that gods enjoy, and they are jealous, and they try to fight for it and get some of it. So they constantly face the suffering of hostility, combat, and dispute. They're constantly fighting with the gods. But the gods have more, they have more merit, and so the gods, even though the demigods fight them, the gods will always win because they have more merit. So the gods also have the suffering of yeah. So this comes later.
근데 달라들이 뒤에서 달라들 함이기 동아서 달라들 함이 권쟁고야 대 동아요 비딩트스 너발은 건 봐요 말했어 너발 건 봐요 말했어 너발 같이 오나고 몸도야 말했어 타마에 당 타바做过吧当他做起过的七天穷的对那米什么样的东啊切但七天穷的变没是东啊有的是的전에 녀송송배 동아다 용 동아다 요레스 가르스나 고 다들 실행 같은 코로나다 시시효를 하고 있어와 시시하고도 되는 시리콩에 송송마도 당님에 그 인와티 나라 그러나 소남소토요 말와 소남소마도 되는 송송소建筑효를 그러나 하게 님에제네테 야보요와 대 요리다지 말은 송송도 제송 제네동 바제 리송도 딕베 동아 섬세요 살와 산에 요초 마발롱마라 책미스 나네 요나 마발롱나 책요 말레스
And then next is the suffering of the gods. And the gods, they also have the suffering of the demigods. So because the demigods are constantly fighting with them, so the gods are in a constant state of dispute, of defense. And in addition, they also have no satisfaction from their desire. So no matter how much they have, they never feel that they have enough. They never really actually find satisfaction, really enjoy all of their enjoyments that they have. They spend their time fighting with demigods, and then when the time of death comes, they experience more mental suffering than the Diavici hell beings. And so that's because when death comes, a god is able to see their future rebirth, and that is mostly birth in the lower realms. They see how they will fall into those lower realms. And that is an incredible suffering. It torments their mind incredibly. And they have to go to the lower realms because they used up all of their merit by being distracted in their lives and not accumulating any more merit. And having used up all merit, they can only take birth in the lower realms, and they can see that before falling into the lower realms. And that's an incredible kind of suffering that they experience. So then after that, they do fall into those lower realms.
저는 다 들에서 정도 콜로 저번 알레는 세제 그래서 숨쉬자 손내는 제지 제차 주기 채소 제지 제차 자 주사 제 채토 와서로 제지 그냥 칠러 왕서와 제지 그냥 체크하다 왕 그래서 그냥 체크하다 아고 삼년 제지 삼방에 막가지 제지는 지나는 코로나 왕체스 도장 바충레스 테마타도 마살 통 와시도 서버데 잠레인 ons 와테 나이다 사마 존남 사마 소리테 마통체스 와베 세나이 삼방에 바세테 삼년 조티케데 동루게 정도
For example, in the god realm of the 33, a Chakravartin king named Mandata was able to live the lifespan of 114 Lord Indras. He conquered half the throne of Indra, and he thought, so he had this evil thought, thinking that he could kill Lord Indra, and then he would conquer the whole throne. And the moment he had that thought, he immediately fell down. So his merit came to an end, and he fell into the lower realms.
저는 로폰 파괴시네 스타 다들 신청이 나와 제진 초보니 저 좋은 장스다 제진 제도 다 처음에 초변에 스트레스 ဒီစောနမ်စီနာထုံးလို့ဆိုတာဝါလေကျဝါကေငယ်ဆုံးဆုံးတုံးငယ်ဆုံးလာရငယ်ဆုံးတုံးစောနမ်တို့စီဆုံးနာစောနာရပမာစာစောနမ်စီဆုံးနာတဲ့လာငယ်ဆုံးတုံးလို့ကလေးခလိုဂျေဂျာနီထချောနာယလာရခလိုရတဲ့စံခလိုဂျေရဂျာဝစေထင်ရချဆုံးနာတင်ခလိုစောနမ်စောဆုံးနာတဲ့လာရခလိုချင်ဝတော့ချလို့ကလေး
And then Nagarjuna said in a letter to a friend, having become Lord Indra, worthy of offering, even he, by the power of karma, will fall again to the lower realm. So whenever merit is exhausted, then even he will fall into the lower realms. Even if one becomes a Chakravartin, one will become again a slave of samsara.
No, tene danga zo teri no teri karsana de la ya xian yang se no ru chima mi ba se je yores sum chi za sum ne yores de long chu ga de jian chu le lu le da chime yan pa chuo se da lu le chime yan ba ni de la zo chima xin bo sa ra lu po la wo de xi ren ga de xi de qi bei da de de lu de chima ma yan de bei me se chima du ya ka shuo sa de de la ko na ke ze ben ja dong jin da ma da yong de za yong me top le chima du ya ze ka shuo sa wa wo lu le chime yan o yes o yang yo ba yes da la ze zo lu lu o yo sa ra zo nam ti tu te o te pa ri de xi ren ga o te me ba cha na de ne me to jian yo ba ning me to sin chung wa te yo sa ra go de zo ning ba cha zo ma xi ren ga de ne me to chung wa te ning ba cha 我这来回的父母呢，门都行，来了我你那边在来回父母就是娘们的那过上说，都用还是叫什么那自己的口在门都是现在要上班了，晓得现在刚才把了啊，但有的可能这个用就说了吧。我这他可能呢长大了，是他提的的，我说那么是起码呢，马上真的忙个的是多这点了，那么在泡沫时候去都把它接完通是，这怕是这个接完了呀，那通的也是。 对，你真的马吉不希望，马吉不会希望。那马吉的会结婚，那他现在别动啊有，我真的有，我问有多吧，对不？是我问身边先把的，我问这个不是再往起来是，我听你听我问不结果说别动啊有是，我真的移动啊，你要去这样的，但你要先马吉那，你要马去那做东西，前面那这种别动啊了，我说我挺那一点动啊穷的是。
And then furthermore, the body of the son of the god Vimalamani, having experienced the pleasure of God's wealth in the 33 realms, that's in the god realm of the 33. So this god began to have a filthy smell. So this is to happen a week before a god dies. Their whole life, they have a very pleasant fragrance or pleasant smell, but one of the signs that their death is approaching is that they begin to smell filthy. And then the luminosity of the body also disappeared. So their entire lives, a god is always luminous and radiant, and then that vanishes when they approach death. And the flower ornaments became stale. So gods were this garland of flowers that never withers, they never dry out their entire life. But when death approaches, those flowers wither. And then celestial maidens and youths, so their partners lost their love for him and left him alone. And he thought, what is the reason for this? And he realized that his previous merit was exhausted and he had not accumulated the merit for the next life. He then saw that he was going to take birth in the womb of a yellow-bellied pig living in the mud of Bodh Gaya, Magadha's Bodh Gaya. When he saw it, he experienced great pain, like that of a mother whose only child had died, a camel whose only young had died. So apparently it is said that camels have an exceptional kind of love for their offspring, for their children, more than other animals. So they suffer a lot when their offspring, their babies die. or like a fish that had been thrown onto a hot desert sand.
전에 다 로봉로 저 그래서 레슨 파괴 신뢰는 거와 니만 다베 루토 랑케 루스 니만 다베 니만 다바데 우자 루 다르 톱디 원아 오 힌지켄 차바 제조장 소지켄 탐치 차바 안디 존남 시손나 라리아 마나 마드 대초네 랑케 라과 장포는 통조 소다 들 차로
And then Nagarjuna said in a letter to a friend, one who gains the body, the sun and moon, as brilliant as the sun and the moon, even though their light pervades the universe, once their merit comes to an end, they will fall again into the thick darkness and will not see even their own outstretched hand.
시송소 송감다 송미 감니 보네 저베 동아상 두지케 동아니 마조로 왜 다파 동아로 소다 송감도 송미 감도 소라 저베 동아트 미바라 한 저베 동아다 처반 두지 동아트 요라든 마로도 있네 동아로 요래 정도
Because the beings of the form realm and the formless realm are not liberated from the suffering of change and the all-pervasive suffering, they constantly suffer. So beings in the form and formless realms, they do not experience the suffering of suffering, but they do experience the all-pervasive suffering and the suffering of change.
문다스 동아 발대는 티키티는 제 한국어 방향 로지 그래서 존중나요서 어때 현재 동아 연대 교회 측과 시와시스 어때 현재 그 동아티 연대할 때 동아들 연대 요서 문다원이 나타데 대조와지나 소송하자 파차 근데 제 타바 탐지 챈바도야 공방就是这么当特别的是没呢我동아들 때我동아들天气呢那他这种동아 싫어没对这全个马来是这个我天绿머체상가 소제 야 살바삼 지침에 공부도 해야 돼 머체 약효레스 어송으로
So human beings experience some suffering, and because of the suffering we experience as humans, we are able to develop renunciation and a wish to free ourselves from samsara. That's also mentioned in the Bodhicharya Vataram. It says that that's the quality of suffering. Suffering has a good quality because when we understand suffering, when we experience suffering, we develop a sadness with samsaric existence. And also it eliminates pride. And we are then able to practice to become enlightened. Whereas a God never experiences any suffering, and therefore a God never thinks about practicing the Dharma. And that is why it is said that the human birth is the best birth in order to attain liberation.
对呢大家们来的东东堂的今天是写当前呢你为做但写当前你为做的做上他会刚把他会当样做成功了跟着我别抢了他把他们进行公帮做成功了写当前呢你为做生了钱呢也大做对目前呢都做多钱钱呢没也做长多钱呢还没做我家钱呢他也做我在没他特别做到你是我在没他的话他把做家票提出过的这种多
The drugs ja die gabla die ja die drogen
我现在被刚把当票的，刚把当票做家了。
die drogen ja
这头发怎么前面做，往做头，有么子做呢？
Milarepa said that the shackles that bind you to hell is hatred, and the shackles that bind you to the hungry ghost realm is greed. The shackles that bind you to the animal realms is ignorance. The shackles that bind you to the human realm is attachment. The shackles that bind you to the demigod realm is jealousy. and the shackles that bind you to the God realm is pride. And so they tie you down. These shackles of afflictions tie you down and prevent you from attaining the state of liberation.
대장 지지멜레 태송 그래서 야르디나 띵초 하키 율다스 하유나 셴타타담나 타타제스 셴타타담 타타제레스 타 소남 케바 마레스 타 셴가자랑 케바티 마레스 모 소남 자벤 리버레스 마르텐 냐베율 자 마르텐 냐베율데나 송 타타자나 타타소 송 타타제비 타타 소원로거다 냐바 양소도 가서 라고라 제이시사도 양사 소원 라고라 我真的我从他讲，他嘛说不起吧，嘛的，你把说嘛说要多不起是嘛是，我这块这边那边的，我这块人家这边那边的是，中多两家说两家嘛是吃喝啥吧。
Milarepa said that when I look up into the realms of the gods, I see the crops are growing without the need of toil, just growing on its own. You plant them now, they're growing now. So the moment you plant them, they ripen. That's not because the gods are really good farmers. It's because of their merit. Then when I look down into the hell realm, I see beings being hit by weapons and dying right there. Dying right there, and they are back up in that moment just to be hit by a weapon again. So he's likely speaking about the reviving hell. And that's not because they are good fighters, but it's the result of their negative karma. So again and again, they experience that suffering as a result of their evil karma.
真的，当周吧这周了，长袖他当那没呢，东啊他这那苦吧那没人看吧那也是，总来的不是，没嘛毛那也是，没嘛毛是那没在有的啥的是吧？我的没嘛毛我的，没上通当着的，但苦吧他到东啊去那也喏，是我但苦吧他到东啊去那也是总多。
Then it says, of the 6 kinds of sentient beings, the gods and the human beings are superior births, but with such sufferings, samsara is like a burning house or a prison, a pit of fire, and a pit of filth. So every part of samsara is suffering.
真的，苦呗你没上班，那苦吧他到东啊那些。我当苦呗你没怎么样不当了，但就当但就当挺苦吧，就是说这块钱得用口的，就他到的讲究那样，假设设计水业去，没错得到可能就得到他们去，得到他们去了，这些明白特别种是吧？假设设计是看最穷的是，没有这种看最穷的是。这他妈的这些人吧特别种是吧？但这他妈的这些人吧特别种学的是，所以说这个上的那面的，你知道吧？是别啥适当是求进步呢，让说你知道吧？下让学的，但是那些咱用么子说，真正求进步点呢？所以说让说下让的，别种那就那说适当进步，我的没这用呢，上不适当别求进步，让对真那么会马路的下让的，我在下让，但你为让说让一下让学的意思。
And so then next it speaks about the suffering of samsara. So contemplate the suffering of samsara. And so in the Bodhicharya Vatara, there's one quote that says, who made the ground of burning iron? And where did those henchmen of hell come from? The Buddha said that all these things are the projections of the evil mind. So, for example, when strong anger arises, one becomes the very embodiment, like a projection, like a natural expression of hell. And that applies for any of the afflictive emotions. For example, if you think of a person who gets really angry, sometimes people get so angry that their face gets all red. And when you look at them, they really seem to be like this kind of a very embodiment of someone from the hell realms. So.
咱那强求先别让走上街，现在公钱当中有了。我在强求先别保证，让走上街，在强民就强求先，肯定呢，钱得来呢，对我就不有，起码呢，对我就不用可的，对的。强求先别让走，适当也让走，你知道吧？强求先别让走上街，我在强调说的是。
In the Gongchik, it is said if there's bodhicitta, the very embodiment or the natural expression of bodhicitta is Buddha. So someone who possesses love and compassion in this life, and therefore will become a Buddha. And so someone with love is the natural expression of bodhicitta, and someone with hatred is the natural expression or the very embodiment of a hell being. Someone with hatred is an embodiment of hells.
当库别年每上边跟库完他对我写吧解释，他让这一天门徒写对写话当对吧托吧，都被研究上吧解释，我当库完他让一米吧，在东华真的写话当，他对吧投票都被研究落是这个意思，我当研发研究落开清不了，我说你对老多些写了不多，老多些我在纠结呢，真的你们写好，总之写好，别骗给了我这里头意思。
So therefore, by contemplating the faults of samsara in this way, one can understand all of samsara to be suffering. Frightened by this and having no desire for it, you long for peace and happiness for oneself, and you cultivate renunciation for samsara. And that's really most important for one's practice is to have renunciation towards samsara. And we cultivate renunciation if we reflect on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. If you have renunciation, that will help you the most in order for you to persevere in your practice with diligence.
真的，可把研究都把这，今天中午开，这种现金没咋把样，得啥是光钱那有啊？现金没咋把样，得啥是呀？这老多些我们这这边讲十步之学生，到现在对十步这个嘛来是，你那讲这十步这个来是，别晓得我这别晓得可是那看把加工，门都店铺没那看把店铺榔头嘛来是，忙一店铺没那，我在哪些来是，所以你们去就，但研究的老多些我那说了，这说店铺说那对你们去下说。店铺恰克来是。
Jigten Songkuen said in the Gongchik, to me, the preliminaries are more profound than other practices. So with that, he referred to the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. So others may consider other practices as more profound, but to him, the preliminary practices of the 4 thoughts are most important. Because, for example, if you want to build a house and your foundation is not stable, then the house won't be stable too. So the stable foundation in our practice is renunciation and a firm understanding of those 4 thoughts. If your renunciation is firm, then your practice will become stable.
真的，大这里嘛，这长跑的酒吧，知道吧？长跑的酒吧，让看松多边多下车完了，这就把做长跑的酒吧，但是看松多边多下车呢，这就可能做个的是，是一趟车了，阳性米是把他们其他车小把他们其米呢，是把小把他再把车送了，阳是把这个嘛的是，但阳性现在是把看松可把这个嘛的是这个这种可是吧？
And then it says, then having cultivated a pure life that is a pure conduct, and you attain the state of a full destroyer or an arhat. And if you free yourself of desire, of attachment, you attain a state that is free from the 3 realms. So you're not taking again birth in the 3 realms.
真的，这吃完了，养出来，谁是研究出点吃完的是，养是没吃完的了，谁是在研究出点什么的嘞？研究出点什么的嘞？用多。
And so this state of being free from desire, to samsaric existence, and also of possessing ethical discipline is what's called renunciation.
전에 로폰 파페스 다 로폰 파페 쿠르바이 마중나 양양데 바토마다 쿠르바 쪼와디시 이 마중나데 양양데 바토고 마레스 동아동아 미바네 제오조 쪼와제 마조스 동아르티스 동아마나 제오토 쪼와제게 마레스 텐두 전에 다 동아르티 연텐 요레스 다리쿠 슈바트나 예사와
And Nagarjuna said, if there is no renunciation towards samsara, one will not achieve nirvana. Without feeling tormented by suffering, without understanding suffering, one will not develop sadness with samsara.
전에 제다라 추 람튼 로와라 쿠르베니메 야고zam고레스 땅 투추 냠스네야 땅 쿠르베니메 zam고스 산 쿠르바 세디 땅 코르도리라 바타리 예찬라 상나 가서 라마제 다 시르몬다제 나로 샤나 카이레 무게 요르텐 로 마셰나 디나다 쿠르히 도도레데 딩쿠시데리 다 메일은 코나제 녜송송라소 도는 코나 야 토리 좀다 베다 트니샤나 그리고 야로 마로 프로틴데 나이데 가서다 쿠르바니나 쿠르히 도도 쇼레.
And so therefore, transforming the Dharma into the path means to contemplate the faults of samsara and to turn away from samsara. And so samsara, as we mentioned before, is this circle of existence. You're going around in circles. For example, if you trap a fly or a bee in a glass jar and then you close it on top, close the top, then that fly will just fly around in there, sometimes up, sometimes down, but it doesn't know how to get out. Or sometimes it flies on the lower parts of the jar, and that's like being born in the lower realms. And sometimes it goes up to the upper parts of the jar, and that's like being born in the higher realms. But without ever having any chance of escaping, it keeps going around in circles, sometimes up and sometimes down. And in a similar way, we are wandering around in samsara.
지금말에 그 정도와 단 쿠르바 동아리 전소도 조와지베 추이 조와지바 나텐데 추원하고 이 대이 인스나 조와지베 머르뇨 스타 조와지들의 뭐도 변용용레스 시라모도 정도와 대공 어테트레스 어드네 니만 루파군에 세진도와 없송도와 뭐도 녀모 통화 뭐게 저 맞이지나 제신도 다 공부 뭐게 저 지, 개와 저 맞이 라고서 저진데 개와 저 치사레스. 개와 저 지제디 체시면도 없어. 뭐게 저 맞이제디 체시도 없어. 아테 양다 개와 저 맞이 뭐게 저 지제는 배제면 치사레스. 심지어도 로 고로와 대신 받침도 정도 루바 군에 폰.
Milarepa said that actually when you think about the immense suffering in this ocean of samsara, it is cause for great sadness, and yet not many people feel sad about it. And then Drupa Gunlek, another master, he said that when you tell them to don't practice, don't engage in the 10 non-virtues, they do it. And if you tell them practice the 10 virtues, they never do it. So maybe since people kind of work backwards, maybe we should turn it around and say, do the 10 non-virtues and don't do anything virtuous. Maybe that would work.
that's it. 단 코르마타다 로도 바셰 고송 스타 코르마타다 로도 데스. 거래송 근데 교어지 이렇게 기본 정신남에 도스타 기본 정신남에 코르바 로도나 다 라므레를 원해 라므라 바인데 다 기본 충분해도 다 기본 정신남에 코르바 로도가 되스.
So therefore, one should turn away one's mind from samsara, and this was referred to by great Atisha as the stage of the path of a person of intermediate mental scope. So we mentioned in the Lamrim, there's one with the lower mental scope that just thinks about his life, and then one who thinks about liberation and turns away from this life is of intermediate mental scope.
我到世界上的先把一些这些听上去了了，现在强了出版面，现在了强了出版面，现在了现在了我现在先把出版面，可是了现在研究面，我在当中了现在强三面，等于了中多，我当这问的问题是，大从大了现在，这强就什么的意思？
In the different texts, Sakya text, it says that when one who is attached to this life is not a real Dharma practitioner. One who clings to samsara has no renunciation. One who fixates on their own benefit has no bodhicitta.
我这几天呢，当我做几个这个南特期间呢，我当这几天呢，我当这了是就南松阳，那南特就是南他就南松，他这个现可能在东岸他大些呢，就南松，这南出来他西过来是，我当出来他嘛是那安这口嘛的，他南出来西过来是，南松阳是年头他让上街人家。南看着前面别看，南出来因西瓦些是，我当年头他那上街头，这当他南出来的那种是吧？南看着前嘛是南出来的是，我当真正出来的是呀，昨天啥的，当然就是在火车站头那有啊，当年头是做别怕，但等眼睛要把那在修送的，可能上街送咱们个是，上街送咱们的，干嘛没那种个是，这上街出嘛的是有点不关注个是。我这上节是听着大家话忙不，上头可能听那个听到些点的那点个哇，我听那这开始是呢，这是上节在排队的上节这个，就看到我这样这种做个的是，对我这样这种做对年头是，年这种，但可能等个是说细个的是，这上节公我是点个的是，这上节公我是点呢，真的但可能这个上节公我是这个哇。我曾经用的，但是上节送给他也经常去他的上节中，这上节我能买的是，我真的就经常提高进步，那么的学呢，搞完我们做做这把讲，我真的上节投给的送给的是，我这送我的这这有人问我这个是，他才拿出来这些，那我说叫我上节过的送给啥的吧。就当天很多年头的，让上节让单国家就在搿里听留那事情呢，然后听留出来用这个。你那到身边可能说来说是有的，是老300个就是单个，可现样子相当做起过的这当呢，老凶个嘛的是，这样的啊，个身边看了看对弄，但身边在了老趟300个就是弄个的，来是的，那年头的让上节让他说我的，可能哈，这就单小的的，这点呢也上节特别哈，可嘞。
So this is the individual of the with the intermediate mental scope, and so now the Dharma has become the path, but that's still not enough if the path is not free from confusion. The path also must be free from confusion. So although the Dharma becomes the path, there's no certainty whether it leads to the hearers, solitary realizers, and so forth. Therefore, in order to dispel the delusion of the path, you should renounce the hearers and solitary realizers. So regarding the solitary realizers and the hearers, so it is generally said that they are on a path of delusion, and that is because in the jewel ornament of liberation, it is said that a hearer, for example, spends aeons in a state of samadhi and thinks that he has attained enlightenment. So he stays there for a very long time, believing he is already enlightened, but he actually is not enlightened. He just stays in that state for a very long time, for many aeons. And then eventually the Buddha comes along, and then light rays emanate from the Buddha's heart, and these light rays awaken the hearer from his samadhi, and then he sees the form of the Buddha, and the Buddha tells him, you are not enlightened yet. That's not real enlightenment. You have to enter the Mahayana path, and you still have to practice for some aeons and accumulate merit and purify obscurations before you attain enlightenment. So when they clear away confusion on the path, one attains enlightenment much quicker. So then maybe the question arises, and why does this path of hearers in solitary realizes even exists? Like, why does one even go along that path then? It's because everyone has a different mental capacity, and that's due to our karma. And so therefore we have to practice from the space of mind that we're at right now. For example, if you tell someone about the importance of cultivating bodhicitta, altruism, it's just too much for them. They can't really comprehend that. And so then they have to take a different path, and it just takes longer. They still attain enlightenment, it just takes longer.
Oh, la so tene da nga zo farsen tang xiang na ta kan ma jung ba da chu su zum ba de lo xi ga go de zong de kan ma jung.
So let's take a break for 15 minutes and come back at 3:15 in Chicago.
Okay, you go. Oh, it's okay.